Hello. So in this video for the Writing Notes channel, I'm talking with Kevin Hulburt. And today we're going to be talking about two major things. We're going to be talking about the experience of tutoring from a student perspective. So what kinds of things you as a student should expect when you seek out tutoring, especially for English or for composition and rhetoric. And we're going to be talking about the teacher training aspects of that, or the instructor training aspects for that. So first off, Kevin, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Philip.
Yeah. So Kevin J. Hulburt is a lecturer of rhetoric and composition, as well as a PhD candidate in curriculum and instruction, with an emphasis in curriculum and supervision at Pennsylvania State University, where I also work. He's my office mate, by the way. His dissertation research focuses on the pedagogical choices of an experienced mindfulness and compassion teacher within the context of an intervention for educators. Working from a socio-cultural learning perspective, he is interested in how mindfulness and compassion-based practices are learned and how they can impact education practices, including those of K through 16 educators and the teachers of those educators. Keep all that stuff about mindfulness in mind, because we are going to come back to that.
We can remain mindful of it.
We can remain mindful of it. I was going to try and come up with some kind of good pun for that, but you beat me to it. So, all right. So the first thing, the English 5 program here at Penn State. I'll sort of briefly contextualize this. Kevin is running the teacher training sessions for both English 5 and what's the number of the other one?
The peer tutoring program at Penn State. So I'm training the undergraduate peer tutors, as well as working with faculty and graduate students who are preparing and now practicing tutors in the English 5 program.
Yeah. So the English 5 program at Penn State is a bit different than a sort of normal writing center tutoring experience. So to start us off, can you talk a little bit about the English 5 program and what that does here at Penn State?
Yeah, so Penn State does have a thriving undergraduate writing center that has a strong peer tutoring program. And I actually was part of that program as a tutor as an undergraduate at Penn State years ago. And so that's a successful program where students can come in and get help on their writing and collaborate with a fellow undergraduate peer. But Penn State also offers this 1-credit English 5 course, which is a companion course, usually with English 15, which is our freshman composition course, English 15S, which is the freshman composition course for ELL students, English language learner students, or one of the 202 classes, which is the companion writing course that happens later for undergraduate students and is more disciplinary focused. So they take this 1-credit course along with those courses, and they're assigned a tutor. The tutors are either faculty members or graduate students who have been trained and are kind of experienced educators themselves. And they work with them in a 35-minute session once a week as a kind of support through that writing course. So if they're in English 15 and they take English 5, it's 1 additional credit, and they're meeting with somebody every week to collaborate on their writing. The course is graded in the sense of they have to attend the course, but otherwise they get the exact same score as they get for their main course. Whatever your English 15 grade is, or whatever your English 202 grade is, you get the same grade in English 5. And that makes it not an evaluative course, right? So the English 5 tutor's job is really to collaborate as a fellow writer in the world, and to kind of to meet them where they are and work with them on the goals that they have with their own writing throughout the whole semester.
All right, fantastic. So I think first off, it's worth addressing this idea, because I think there's for many students a sort of stigma around seeking out tutoring, whether that's going to the writing center or signing up for a program like English 5 or some other support program a university might have. I think there's this belief that tutoring is for remedial students or for students who are dumb or whatever it is. Is that a myth? Is that the sense that is there any sort of truth to that? Or is that not really the way that these programs function?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say that some students identify themselves as like they are concerned, especially when they're coming into English 15, but also in the 202. But with English 15, our freshman composition course in particular, they're reflecting on their high school experiences and writing courses, and they may feel like they may need extra support, right? Either because English isn't their first language, or because maybe they struggled in high school composition classes. So they can self-identify and they say, yeah, this is worth it to me to meet with somebody once a week. Then sometimes instructors might recommend the course to students who seem to be struggling in the early days of the course.
Yeah.
But that is not the majority, I think, or it's not a vast majority of English 5 students. There's a lot of English 5 students who feel like, well, I want to do well in the course. In fact, I want to do very well in the course. And I know that I should be working on my writing every single week, but I tend to put things off. Or, here's an opportunity where I'm going to meet with somebody who is trained, and we're going to focus only on my writing, right? In an English 15 course, we have a capped number of students, right? And it's a pretty small group, but even at 24 students, that is a lot of students, right? And so there's not a lot of one-on-one instructional time. So here's an opportunity to get that one-on-one instructional time. And a lot of really strong writers take advantage of that to improve in their writing as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, both from my own experience as a tutor during undergrad, but also teaching English 15 here for 4 years now. I've had a lot of very strong students who've signed up for English 5 because they just wanted that additional help. Or you're absolutely right about incoming first-year students. There is, for a lot of them, this sense that they're not very good at English. And for me, I find that a lot of that has to do with their high school instructors assigned them specific topics that they just struggled to write about because they weren't interested in, or their high school instructors were really grammar and mechanics focused. And once you get a bit more freedom, a lot of these students I find tend to do better and to enjoy writing more. But yeah, definitely that idea of you get individual help as opposed to the lecture or the discussion or the analysis of sample essays or whatever the class of 24 is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So a little more into the sort of nitty gritty here. When a student, and I'm thinking particularly of writing center students here, but this is relevant for English 5 as well. When a student comes into tutoring for English, what should they expect to happen? What's the student going to be expected to do or bring or know or have prepared? What's the role of the tutor? What is the tutor going to do in that session?
I'll tell you, like the ideal scenario, right, is that the writer comes in and they have a piece of writing, or maybe they're in the brainstorming phase, but often they have a draft, right? And they come in with a draft and they have specific questions that they're concerned about, or specific areas that they want to get right and they're not sure, and they want to get audience feedback, and they want to collaborate with another writer to kind of think about, is this doing what I wanted it to do? And then the tutor's job is to meet them with those questions and to help them and collaborate on their questions. So the ideal is that it's really writer focused, where the writer is saying, this is what my concerns are, and the tutor is supporting them in that, because the goal isn't to make the paper what the tutor thinks it should be. It's to help the writer create the paper that they wanted to create. Now, that said, another focus of each session is the assignment, and making sure that there are times, and I know from your own class, you've probably experienced this, a good paper, an interesting, engaging paper, and it doesn't meet the assignment, right? And so it's a really challenging role as an instructor when you see that those writings, that it's strong writing, but it's not what was asked in the assignment. So tutors in English 5 and in English 250 are trained to really take an assignment focused approach as well. What was the assignment? What were you asked to do? And then what questions do you have about this writing, and what can we work on today? And so that's kind of like the two-step process. And then once they're in the session itself, based on where the writer is, the tutor can use kind of different ways of collaborating on that writing process.
So just to briefly follow up on that, would you agree that one of the things students should pretty much always bring to a tutoring session is a copy of the assignment sheet itself?
Yes, because otherwise we're in a translation process. We're playing telephone game, right? Of, well, what was the assignment? And you're explaining what you think the instructor, wanted you to do. It's best to just bring the actual assignment sheet and start there, look at it together, because that's what you'll ultimately be graded on, right? And so meeting that assignment and kind of the requirements, what were they looking for, and getting a sense of what is this instructor emphasizing, right? Because within the same assignment, different instructors might emphasize different parts of what makes a strong cover letter, for example. And so what is this instructor's emphasis? And then being able to look at the paper through that lens.
I think that's a super important point, because at a program like the English 15 courses at Penn State, we do have these sort of standardized assignments that a lot of instructors teach, but a lot of instructors put their own particular spin on them. So for my classes, for instance, I do teach a rhetorical evaluation project and a productive counter-argument, but those are my unique variations of projects that the program in writing and rhetoric here has come up with. So what I'm requiring is not necessarily the same as what someone else teaching English 15 might require. And so if you're an English 5 tutor, or if you're a writing center tutor, or whatever it is, if the model you have in mind is the generic PWR assignment sheet, that's not necessarily going to help my students. So that's super, super important.
And I would emphasize that doesn't mean that the grading is subjective. What it means is that your standard, your assignment, literally the assignment sheet, is different than my assignment sheet. And so if I'm just applying my mental conception of what a rhetorical analysis is, I might not actually be addressing what you've identified as the core skills that you're looking for the students to work with in your assignment.
Yeah, absolutely. The other follow-up I wanted to ask about with this, from my experience as a tutor in a writing center context, a lot of students came in really just wanting help with grammar and mechanics, or really wanting someone to edit the paper for them. So is it, in your opinion, is that a sort of reasonable expectation for someone coming into a tutoring session, or is that missing the mark?
It's reasonable in the sense that it's common, but it's not the goal. So let me give you an example. If there's a paper and there are comma errors throughout the paper, but the paper does not have a thesis, and it's supposed to have a clear thesis, and it does not have structure and organization. Well, if I help you with every comma mistake, but we didn't address that higher order concern, you're going to have to make large changes, and those sentences are likely going to change. So the commas aren't going to matter. And so we also try to approach, working from the assignment is, this is what the goal is, this is what the rhetorical situation is, and how I'm trying to meet that rhetorical situation. So there's a hierarchy of concerns, right? Is there clarity of the idea here? Is there organization? Is there development of those ideas? Before then we go down to a grammar mechanics level. Now that said, sometimes there's repeated errors that can exist within a writing. And so it can be helpful for a tutor to identify those and explain the rule, and as a way of kind of helping that writer consider one area of correction and apply that throughout their writing. So if a tutor sees frequent comma splicing, they might discuss that idea and say, I see this a lot in your writing, and then help that writer to see throughout their writing. But the truth is, if we just go through and edit the paper, it's not necessarily, it's not likely to help the writer improve because we're addressing all different kinds of errors. And so even if we're fixing them, it wouldn't be a learning experience. And that's part of what these English 5 and peer tutoring are intended to be, a real learning experience for both participants.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that really bears emphasizing, that this isn't about you can come in and drop this off and we'll fix it and you pick it up in half an hour. It is about learning to improve your own writing. So it's part of the larger program of education. I think that's super, super important to make very clear in tutoring sessions.
And to me, it better represents what writing in reality is like, right? Outside of an academic school setting. When I worked in the world of finance, nothing that I wrote was individual. Everything was a collaborative process. There was always multiple eyes, multiple drafts, different people's opinions, and then I'm working to integrate their ideas, and we're collaborating together towards the final draft. So, the idea that, okay, I write the paper solo, right, and then one person proofreads, and it's final. It doesn't represent what writing tends to look like in the real world. More often than not, there's a collaborative process involved, whether that's an editor or a co-author in those processes. So we're trying to kind of give students that experience more as well.
Great. So the last sort of follow-up question, I guess, on this. This has already, I think, sort of been discussed, but can you give us a sort of clear, concise sense of what a student can do to get the most out of a tutoring session, whether that's English 5 or Writing Center?
Yeah, so just to reemphasize, right? Bringing the assignment sheet so that we can work from the assignment sheet, and reviewing where you are in the writing process, brainstorming, drafting, revising, and kind of looking at that yourself and saying, what are my questions? Where am I worried or concerned about my writing here, or where do I feel like this can improve? Because that will really be the best way to guide the session to meet the questions you have.
All right, thanks. So I want us to switch gears a little bit now and turn to the idea of English education or pedagogy training, because you've taught both undergrads and you're now training experienced instructors. You've also taught, right, high school or middle school?
High school.
Okay. I didn't know if you had also taught middle school as well, but so you've taught a pretty wide range of age groups, learning groups. So what differences have you sort of experienced between teaching maybe high schoolers, undergrads, and now training instructors who themselves have, in some cases, maybe decades of teaching experience? I don't know if you've got anybody with decades, but
I do, actually. Okay. There's members of that course to train instructors for English 5, and those instructors have been teaching for decades and simply haven't taught English 5 before, so they're taking the 602. So they actually have more experience at Penn State and more instructional experience at the undergraduate level than I do. And so that is an interesting difference there, right? So yeah, differences between them. It's hard to compare high school. I can compare high school to undergraduate, undergraduate to adult. The kind of the range, right? I think that the older you are as a student, the more you ask, what's the relevance and what's the usefulness of this information? How am I going to implement this, and what is the value of this? And so, you know, yeah. So meeting that question of what are we going to be doing and what's the value of this, and kind of being able to answer that effectively is becomes critically important in order for those students to feel as though this is worth their time and important. You do benefit with older students that they're more likely to tell you exactly what they're willing to do, and then they will show up and complete assignments, right? So the motivation is a bit more intrinsic, both in terms of they're looking for, why am I doing this, and if they are there, then they'll do it themselves, right? So you don't need that extrinsic motivational systems of grades as much, or tracking down missing assignments, so the supports, the scaffolding kind of back up from a high school to an undergraduate to working with faculty. That's for certain. And yeah, so I don't know. They're in some ways such different worlds. Even teaching undergraduate peer tutors and working with, and I say working with faculty members in English 602, it's just an entirely different world. With the 602, I feel as though I'm collaborating with peers in a way that I can bring up a topic and let's take a look at a reading by an academic on an aspect of tutoring. And then everyone shares their personal experience as instructors themselves with that issue. And that, to me, feels a better approach than being an instructor teaching folks who in some cases have more experience than I do in relation to specific topics, or certainly different valuable experience than I do. With the undergraduate peer tutors, they come with their own experience as well, but I think that there is a bit more of an instructor role there, where I'm introducing them to areas of thought, and the idea of switching minds from being a student to being a tutor, which is a bit closer to being a teacher. They haven't necessarily considered themselves in that role, though some have, for sure.
Okay. So I wanted to follow up on what you were saying about older students or instructors who are maybe more self-motivated. Have you also seen that maybe work in the opposite direction, where if it's not clear to an instructor who's been teaching for 9 years or 15 years or whatever it is, why they have to do a particular thing, that are they less likely to do it and just sort of say, yeah, I didn't see that as important? Or is that not an issue you're seeing?
It's not really an issue I'm seeing. And I mean, given that it's a professional course, I mean, as opposed to an academic course where it's graded and the intention is to get a degree and I'm an evaluator, I view it as a professional course, and it's either graduate students who are there as a part of a graduate program to be professionals, or actual professionals and colleagues of mine in the department. So I mean, not really. I think that they show up as professionals to the space, and I think that we're effectively using that space to consider, what does it mean to tutor, and what does it mean to and what issues are we seeing specifically in our current tutoring sessions, because we're all tutoring currently. And so oftentimes there's a kind of a brainstorming session of, how do I respond to this? And does anybody know what the rules are about this? So for example, if a case of plagiarism comes up with one of the students that we're tutoring, right, to discuss that as a group, and it's a nice collaborative space to get feedback in that way.
All right, fantastic. So the last question that I had prepared, I may have follow-ups to this. So as I had said in the introduction for you, your scholarly work is really focused on these ideas of mindfulness and compassion, specifically in teacher training, right? So how has that sort of scholarly work and that scholarly focus shaped your practice? particularly with training the English 5 instructors and the peer tutoring instructors?
Yeah, that's a really neat question. So essentially, if we used a lens from mindfulness to what's happening in a tutoring session, the person that you're tutoring becomes an object of attention. And I don't mean that we're objectifying the human being. I mean that we're giving them our full attention. Where are they? What are they trying to accomplish? How can I meet with them? And our minds are simultaneously doing what our minds do, which is creating all kinds of thoughts, changing, moving our attention to different topics, right? And we're constantly bringing our attention back to focus on this session with this student in this time. We're also likely having thoughts of judgment of ourselves. Am I doing the right thing? Of the 2T, are they paying attention? Are they, all kinds of things there. And there's all these other circumstances surrounding our situation, this student and myself, that are kind of out here, that are impacting what's happening in this session. So, from a mindfulness perspective, it's about trying to be present with that, to again and again come back and be present with the focus of attention. In this case, this relationship, this social interaction, in order to be the most present I can for them and to help them. And the other, oftentimes in mindfulness, we talk about mindfulness is one wing. The other wing is compassion, and having those at the same time. And compassion is an interesting topic when we think about tutoring, when we think about education, because students are ultimately held accountable for the work they do or do not produce within their courses.
Absolutely.
But as an instructor, and especially as a tutor, we had the ability to be present with what the circumstances were that led to those outcomes. And as a tutor, we're even closer to that. I think if you tutor long enough, you will have a student who cries with you, right? You will have a student who's stressed, who's struggling. And being able to see the nature of that struggling and meet them there with compassion, not pity, but real compassion to see, what that person is experiencing. That allows you to, again, be present with what's currently happening, and ultimately help them to consider, where do we go from this moment, right? If it's a stressful moment, that might not be, let's get right back to the paper and look at your introduction paragraph. It might be, let's unpack kind of what's going on and how you're feeling about being an undergraduate at Penn State and what you're hoping to do, after you graduate, and having that conversation and being there in that way. And it's one of the hats that we wear. So in training, one of the methods that I think is valuable, there's a philosopher, Martin Buber, who talks about the I-thou relationship, which is, how do we relate to someone else as a fully developed, separate being with sadnesses just like me, with happiness just like me, with goals just like me, with their own life experiences just like I have. And when we start to work with other people from that perspective, we find it's actually a bit harder to do. We tend to relate to people as it. And when you have 25 students in a class, it's actually very challenging to see the full humanity of all those people. And so I think tutoring is a really great access point to practicing that part of being a teacher, because it's just one person. And can I see the humanity of this one person and relate to them with compassion?
One of the things that occurred to me as you were talking about sort of seeing a full picture and appreciating contexts and the struggles that individuals are going through, I think that's especially important right now because of the coronavirus pandemic. Andy, my partner, is tutoring and is in Kevin's 602 for the English 5 tutors. And she's had a number of tutees who either have coronavirus, had coronavirus, or thought they had coronavirus. And that's a major source of anxiety, both because of the disease itself, but also because of things like being put in quarantine or isolation and the psychological challenges that come with that. So I definitely think that's a really important point, this idea of seeing a whole picture and trying to work with that whole picture rather than just saying, here's the paper and that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, and thanks for kind of bringing awareness to the current context, because this becomes so much more challenging and so much more important. And the other side of that too, right? We're not focusing only outwards, but focusing on ourselves as well. And I know that the tutors that I'm working with are also instructors, are also students, are also, partners, are also having these same kind of considerations in their own lives as well.
Yep.
And it's challenging to be an educator right now because of how much you have to hold to be present for someone else, and how much you have to hold to be present with yourself and take care of yourself and make sure that we're kind of putting our own masks on before we try to put masks on others. And that's very much easier said than done right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's true across the board. I mean, you said this in terms of teaching in general, and that's absolutely true. I mean, I've got students who have coronavirus, who've been in isolation and stuff like this. And it's a massive challenge no matter what level of teaching you're doing. And I think mindfulness and compassion are really useful metrics for any of us who are teaching right now.
Yeah, and to know that it's not something that just happens.
Yeah.
These are things that can be strengthened and practiced and attended to in a way that helps to refill our own bucket so that we have the ability to help fill others' buckets as well.
I think that's a nice note to sort of wrap up on. So again, Kevin, thank you very much for talking with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I'm going to stop the session, but I wish you a joyful rest of your semester.
You too, man. And I look forward to the day we can get back together in person.
Yep.